Das Wetter in Vorarlberg.
Was Vorarlberg bewegt. Vorarlberg Live.
Herzlich willkommen an diesem Dienstagabend zu einer neuen Ausgabe Vorarlberg Live. Pressefreiheit, ein Begriff, der gerade in Österreich in letzter Zeit vermehrt in den Mittelpunkt gerückt ist. Inseratenaffären, Einfluss der Politik auf den Journalismus und Message Control in den Medien bestimmen die Schlagzeilen. Begibt man sich dann auf die internationale Ebene, wird aktuell vor allem Russland vorgeworfen, dem kritischen Journalismus den Garaus zu machen. Wie so oft gilt das Zitat: Im Krieg stirbt die Wahrheit zuerst. Dabei braucht man aber nur nach London zu blicken, wenn es um die Auseinandersetzung mit kritischem Journalismus geht. Denn dort sitzt seit Jahren mit Julian Assange, der Gründer von WikiLeaks, in Haft. Dem Aufdecker zahlreicher Kriegsverbrechen droht im Fall seiner Auslieferung in die USA jahrzehntelange Haft. Dagegen laufen weltweit Menschen auf der Straße, Journalisten und Prominente Sturm. Einen der bekanntesten Fürsprecher für den australischen Journalisten darf ich jetzt bei Vorarlberg Live begrüßen. Roger Waters, Mitbegründer der weltberühmten Formation Pink Floyd. Aufgrund der Zeitverschiebung wurde das Interview aufgezeichnet. First question, what do you expect of the decision of Priti Patel, the British Home Secretary?
You know what, I'm trying not to think about it, because given her record, okay, and knowing something as I do of her as a politician and her record, I'm not optimistic. Mm-hmm. But the supporters of Julian Assange all over the world are making an enormous effort, and they're writing hundreds of thousands of letters and sending hundreds of thousands of emails to try and joggle her into a position where she finds herself capable of doing the right thing, which of course is to refuse the extradition of Julian Assange to the United States.
Mm-hmm. Would you like to talk about the reasons you are such a strong supporter of Julian Assange?
Yes, because as a member of an electorate, it is extremely important that I remain informed about things. And I need a free press in order for that to happen. Censorship all over the internet is rife now. As you can see, it's one of the big talking points everywhere, is how Google and Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and all of those things are slowly being closed down so that they are only reporting one side of any of the political stories that are going about. So Julian Assange was a contrary to that general rule. He was an exception to that general rule. He told we the people the truth about things. One truth he told us was about the collateral murder of the two journalists and other innocent men in Baghdad in 2007, which was released by Chelsea Manning. No, she released it in 2007. Mm-hmm. That's when the story started. I'm not sure when the event took place, maybe earlier, 2004. And that is what they didn't like, because he exposed the fact that American servicemen and the American General Command in Iraq were committing heinous war crimes. And they were very embarrassed by it. And so they are trying to kill Julian Assange as a warning to young people who might be taking up a career in journalism to say, look, if you ever report on anything or publish anything that we disapprove of, we will kill you. This is not a world that I want to live in. I want to live in a world where people are free to express their opinions. Interestingly enough, on my Wall tour, worldwide tour of the Wall show in 2010, I, every night, used video of that collateral murder in my show So if Julian is going behind bars, I should be too. I published that as well, as did the New York Times and the Guardian newspaper from London and the Washington Post, among others. But they have singled him out because he is the brain behind this idea that we should have access to information to tell us what our governments are doing in our name, particularly if they're committing war crimes or any crimes. Because as Edward Snowden found as well, they're committing huge crimes in terms of the way they surveil their own population. That's why Edward Snowden has to live in Moscow now. He can't go back to the United States. They would lock him up too for a very long time.
You refer to war crimes. Isn't it hypocritical now for Western democracies to demand free speech, democracy and freedom in relation to the Ukrainian conflict when they imprison a publisher and journalist like Julian Assange?
Of course it is, yeah. It's completely absurd. You know, my friend Caitlin Johnson, who runs a blog from Melbourne in Australia, every day she produces a blog. It's really wonderful. Anybody out there who's interested in an alternative view would do well to follow her, Caitlin Johnson. Yesterday, her whole piece said, the best thing that's ever happened on Wednesday. And she's laughing and smiling because what happened on Wednesday was that George W. Bush at a university in Texas, I can see by the fact you're smiling that you know this story.
Yes, the tweet with Iraq.
Made a great Freudian confession. It wasn't just a Freudian slip, where he confused Iraq and Ukraine. And he described how one man, Putin, had invaded this country and started this terrible war, the blah, 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 in Iraq. And then he went, I mean, Ukraine. Wow. But he was that's probably the first time in his life George W. Bush has ever told the truth about anything. And so, so he described it perfectly there, saying, I'm a war criminal. I invaded another country far more dangerously not more dangerously, but to a far worse end result. Hopefully, unless we go to nuclear war over Ukraine. So it's totally hypocritical.
When you look at the case of Julian Assange, some critics call him a traitor who revealed classified information.
He's an Australian.
Yeah?
He's an Australian. He cannot be a traitor.
Yeah?
Julian Assange has committed no crime, apart from one minor bail violation, which is around the time that he was going into the Ecuadorian embassy to seek asylum. He has absolutely no record of any kind. He has never been accused of a crime. This is a trumped up charge to make him, as I said, into an example. And if they do take him to America, they will kill him. I mean, this is so extraordinary what's going on, how the law that has been cobbled together over the last, since Runnymede in England, since 1215 or whenever that meeting was with King John beside the Thames outside London. It's taken us that long to 1,000 years to get to where we are now. And they're just throwing it out of the window as if it didn't exist. The kangaroo courts, not just Beretzer, who was the magistrate in London, but following that in the High Court in London, are a complete joke. They are show trials. They have nothing to do with the rule of law or any law that any of us have ever heard of. The idea of calling Julian Assange a traitor is absolutely absurd, and everyone with an IQ above room temperature knows it. It's crazy, but we live in crazy times where propaganda is everything. And if you get the New York Times and the Washington Post and Fox News and MSNBC to give a narrative out to the people, people will sadly believe it. So your job as a journalist and my job, because I have a platform and I'm an activist, is to try and disabuse people of this absurd notion that they are being told the truth by the ruling class via the mainstream media. They are not. They're being told a pack of lies, and it's really, really dangerous. They're not being told how dangerous American hegemony is. With particular reference to what's gone on in the Ukraine, there was no need for this war. All they had to do was go, hang on a minute, how would we feel if it was our borders and our national security, not Russia's? We would be beside ourselves. We wouldn't even dream of allowing another country to put nuclear weapons right in Mexico or Canada or Cuba, let us not forget. They wouldn't dream of it. And yet when the Russians say, "Oi, you promised you wouldn't come any closer to our border than the eastern border of united Germany," and here you are now, wanting to push up through the Ukraine to the Russian border. By having organized a coup, let us not forget, in February 2014, by Victoria Nuland and the CIA to depose the democratically elected government of Ukraine, which they did, creating a civil war. They created a civil war by doing that. Because obviously the people in Donetsk and Luhansk, and also in the Crimea, let us not forget, went, what is going on? We just elected this bloke. We may not love him, or we may, but you can't throw him out by military coup, which is what they did. And so, so the people in Crimea appealed to the Russian Federation and said, please, 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 can we be part of you? And the Russians, to their great credit, not a single shot was fired. There was all this talk in the Western media about Russia annexing the Crimea. They didn't. The people of the Crimea got together with their legislative body and they had a referendum, very, very heavily looked at by everybody from the outside. And 96% of them voted to join the Russian Federation. 96% of the population of the Crimea. There was no annexation. It wasn't an invasion. There were Russian military already there because that had been part of the agreement in 1956 when the Ukraine was created at the behest of Khrushchev, who was the president of the USSR at the time. And because of the deep water port in Sevastopol and Odessa, it was agreed that there would always be Russian troops in the Crimea, and there have been, and it worked pretty well up until February 2014, or maybe earlier, in 2008, when the Americans persuaded some of the other Baltic states to join NATO in contravention of the agreement, verbal agreement, that they had made with Gorbachev in 1989. Or 1990, one of those 2 years. So this thing was, and they're still there. Why won't the United States end this war? They could do it in a heartbeat. It could be over tomorrow. Biden is sitting there trying to look like a strong man. And he's gambling with all our lives. All our lives.
Perhaps...
Sorry, go on.
No, it's okay. Perhaps... for me, for example, it's very difficult to put one crime on the same stage to another because war is always bad. Exactly. And it's not things any one of us likes. And especially if you told before about the case of George W. Bush and talking about the invasion of Iraq. And for me, for example, it's still, we have to be critic against Russia also. And also...
Of course. That's a crime. Yeah? It's a war crime. It's the worst war crime to invade a sovereign foreign country. But just because it's the worst war, and it is, that's the worst war crime you can commit, technically. But to pretend that the United States of America didn't commit it in Iraq, didn't commit, and and in cahoots with the UK and France and all the other NATO, didn't commit it in Libya, which they did, and didn't commit it in Serbia, which they did by bombing Belgrade, and that it wasn't committed in Vietnam, and that the string of invasions of foreign sovereign countries is longer than my arm. So yeah, this waving the blue and yellow flags and claiming that this is different is crazy.
Mm-hmm. Perhaps we go back to the case of Julian, and especially as for me as a journalist and for you as an artist. Why is it so important for us building this solidarity to fight for free speech and the release of the WikiLeaks founder?
Because we're human beings. And all human beings on this planet are our brothers and sisters. And we so badly need brave whistleblowers like Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden, who were the whistleblowers, if you like, and in the past, Daniel Ellsberg, and so on. And there are many, many others, John Kiriakou, blah, blah, blah. I could go on and on. To be brave enough to stand up to the ruling class and to stand up to government and say the people have a right to know what's going on. Okay, and the government is quite clear, certainly the US government and the UK government, the two governments I know best, are completely clear in their position, which is no, they don't. We know better than all of you. We don't care what you think. And we don't want people like Julian Assange figuring out how to find things out about what's going on. So we're going to kill him. That's basically the picture. So we, you and I, all the human beings on this earth, it is hugely important for us to link arms and stand shoulder to shoulder and say, no, nada más. No, you will not kill our brother Julian Assange. We need him. If you weren't so crazy, certifiably lunatic, sociopathic, omnicidal morons, you would see it yourself. But you're so bound up in power and profit that you can't actually view your or anyone else's humanity or capacity to act out of love rather than out of moves to gain more power or make more profit. It's quite simple, really. Mm-hmm. I'm, if there's a glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel, it is that the numbers of people who are opposing the ruling class now are growing day by day, but they're growing exponentially. We're seeing. I'm quite active in the Free Palestine movement, and the change that we're seeing all the time now is huge. It started off with a few people here and there. Even I didn't join it until 16 years ago, I joined it. And I was late, and I admit it. It took a while for my eyes to open, but they did then, and I've been involved ever since. And what's just happened in the last week with them killing the American Palestinian journalist in Jenin, and the response of the IDF and the occupying forces to it has, I think, been, obviously it's tragic. That great woman, another great journalist, murdered in cold blood in broad daylight by the Israeli army. Well, hopefully Israel is going to pay in PR terms for that, because if they don't, what are we doing here on this planet? Maybe we should throw our hands up in the air and say, okay, destroy it. Come on, let's blow it up. Or let's allow climate change to destroy it, because that's what they're doing, the governments. They're working in cahoots with the oligarchs so that they can keep the profits pouring in. A lot of them, I know I sound like a broken record, but a lot of them, a lot of the profits coming through the armaments industries, where huge amounts of money are made. It's like the armaments industry and to live in an act of perpetual war is a perfect way for the ruling class to steal money from the poor i.e. anybody who pays a penny in tax, and give it to the rich. It's the exact opposite of the Robin Hood syndrome, who used to steal from the rich to give to the poor. They do exactly the opposite. And they sell this idea. Well, they don't express that idea, but they get away with it using this enormously powerful system of propaganda that's called the mainstream media, that never deviates from the party line.
The mainstream media, a very interesting topic. If you look back a few months or weeks, and especially if you look at the pandemic situation, or also the war and the rise of social media, also fake news campaigns or political interventions on those special topics, or a few weeks ago when Elon Musk told the world that he would buy Twitter. What do you think? How difficult is it for the people to know what is a message that is the truth?
It's very difficult. It's why they keep us as uneducated as possible. And also to find out the truth about anything takes hours and hours every day. Although if you have certain go-to places, the gray zone in the United States would be one of them. If you're interested, for instance, in chemical weapons attacks or something, you just read Aaron Marte, who is one of the editors at the Gray Zone, along with Max Blumenthal, right? And if you read everything that he writes, you get the real, actual truth as close as he can get to it. So, for instance, the chemical attack in Duma, which I was involved in, because I stood up on stage in Barcelona on the 13th of April, which was 6 days after the attack, and exhorted the crowd there to ask their governments not to go and drop bombs on Syria until they were certain that they knew what had happened in Duma. Because I had seen the faked white helmet video saying, look, these children have been attacked by Assad with chemicals and whatever. And all the evidence is, because it all came out because Robert Fisk, an independent journalist from a British paper, went in 2 days later and he interviewed all kinds of people. And all the people at the hospital said, oh, that was just the white helmets. They came in and set it up. It's fake. There were no kids with. The only symptoms that we had were some people with respiratory problems from dust, because they all live underground because there's a war going over, or there was. 2 days later, Al-Qaeda and the rest of them left, right? Assad's government sent buses in to take them away, saying, we don't need to kill you, just leave. This is not your country, piss off. So they did. So, and after that, then we've had all the stories about the IPCW, okay? And Aaron Marte actually spoke to the Security Council about it at the UN about a year ago. And it all came out. And there was a message from, I think his name's Joe, it's not Fontana. Anyway, he was the guy who created the IPCW. And Ian Henderson and Inspector B came out and said, look, we were the people on the ground. We did the investigation in Duma, and we've been fired and discredited because it's not the story they want. So they made up a story and falsified all the facts and presented it. It's not been reported in the mainstream media anywhere. Not a single word of any of that story. If I talk to people about this now, they look at me as if I'm insane and say, what are you talking about? Assad did that. No, he didn't. So it's fascinating. It's very 1984. It's exactly what George Orwell predicted. And he also predicted this in 1984, that it would be necessary for Big Brother and the government and the Ministry of Truth and all of that to always have an enemy and to always have a war going on. And if there wasn't an enemy, to invent one. Which is exactly what the United States of America, the leaders, not the people necessarily, though it's probably a lot of the people, are doing now. And at the moment, The enemy is Russia. And when they've dealt with Russia, the next enemy will be China. Well, if they think they can achieve that and their unipolar dream of ruling the world with brute military force, they will destroy us all, because that ain't going to happen. Neither the Russian people nor the Chinese people are going to lie down. And China particularly is becoming more and more and more, certainly economically powerful every day. And as China is not expansionist, when did we ever hear of China invading anyone or putting military bases all over the world? Well, China, it's not in their mindset. It's not how China works. You know, there was one Genghis Khan, that was some years ago. I mean, he was Mongolian, you know. Anyway, he's part of China now, but their forays into settler colonialism, I'll tell you, there aren't any. They didn't do that. The Brits did it in spades. So did the Portuguese and the Spanish and the Dutch and the Germans. The whole of Europe since the 15th century on figured out how they could build ships and then spread out all around the world and steal everything and rule everybody and tell everybody what to do that they found everywhere. It's called imperialism, and it's been an absolute disaster. Not for the imperialists, except it's bound to have screwed them up, because you can't spend your life raping and pillaging and stealing from people without it affecting you, I believe. Sorry.
Let me go back to Orwell. You talk about instruments that governments use to scare people, to invent enemies. So for me, let's go back to the case of Assange. How can we take the people, those fears, and what can each and one of us do to actively join this campaign to free Julian Assange?
I think all we can do is the things that the appeal that the DEA, weirdly named, but you know, the organization that is working for Julian under the auspices of Stella. And we have to keep emailing and writing. If we could manage a large gathering, and in London, for instance, it was very hard. I was in the October 2020, I think. I was there. We marched from the Australian embassy to Parliament Square, and a number of us made speeches and whatever, but we were about 3,000 people. That's all. And I had a word in public Boris Johnson wasn't there, but I had a gentle word with him or whatever. But if we could get 2 million people in the streets in London, imagine that. I've got some organizers approaching me now, asking for help to put together a concert this summer in London for Assange. I'm on tour. I cannot cancel my whole tour, or I would be there in a heartbeat, though I know how difficult it is, you know. An obvious man for the job would be Geldof, who is probably the most experienced person in the world in doing such a thing. And they may be right, these people who've approached me. And I'm asking questions to see. Well, it's very difficult, you know, because do you remember February the 14th, 2003? Because I do. There were 2 million people in the streets of London. There were 25 million people all over the world in the streets trying to stop George W. Bush and Tony effing Blair from invading Iraq. These 25 million people were right and have been proved that they were completely right in the aftermath, though everybody ignores it. You know, that's why George W. Bush is making a speech at an American university last Wednesday. He gets it all wrong because he's an effing idiot, but he's still allowed that. He shouldn't. He should be in prison. He should have been in prison. So should Tony Blair. Tony Blair's now Lord somebody or other, at least Sir Tony, and George Bush. You know, it's crazy. What was the question again?
it's as you told, 25 million people around the world.
Sorry, you've reminded me. This is my point. George Bush and Tony Blair and Condoleezza Rice and Colin Powell, right? And I've forgotten the other guy's name. But anyway, they completely ignored those 25 million people. They just went, we don't care what you think. You're just the hoi polloi. We're not. Which is interesting that they didn't even flicker, even though they knew that behind closed doors, they were making all this shit up. They knew that Saddam Hussein was no threat to them at all. Not even for a second was he a threat. He had no weapons of mass. He had no chemical weapons, not even a pretense to make a nuclear weapon. He had nothing. He had a few tanks. But they decided to go and destroy Iraq because it felt good to them. You know, they wanted to flex their muscles. They wanted to show everybody that they were the toughest kid in the fucking schoolyard and they were going to do what they wanted. And you know what else they did? They hung the poor bastard, which is what victors do. They hung him for war crimes. How ironic can you get? I mean, I'm no fan of Saddam Hussein. He was obviously an arsehole, just like Putin is. He's a gangster. They're gangsters, you know? But it's so hypocritical. It's so hypocritical. So that's it. They took no notice of. So if we could get 25 million people in the world out to rallies with free Julian Assange plaques, would they take any notice? If you look at history, you would go, no, they wouldn't. They're going to go and do what they want to do. And they couldn't care less about the rule of law or democracy or human rights or liberty or any of that. All of that is just double speak to keep us hooked on the idea that we live in democracies. We don't. We live in autocracies. And they're actually, in the case of the UK and the United States of America, they're plutocracies. There is a very small, tight ruling class. And whoever's in power, they do whatever they're told. Except occasionally you get one who pops up who won't. Jeremy Corbyn. So they employ the services of the Israeli government through the Ministry of Special, I can't remember what the ministry is called, but to discredit him and call him an anti-Semite, which obviously he's not. You couldn't find anyone less anti-Semitic than Jeremy Corbyn, with the possible exception of me. But they blackened his name and they won the election. Talk about foreign countries interfering in elections. The Israeli embassy in London defeated Jeremy Corbyn with the help of the BBC, who ran that disgusting Panorama program, you know, about anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, made by John Ware, you know, who's now fighting in court because people have attacked him for that. And there was another thing on the BBC. It was an awful radio series, but made by a woman called Chloe Hajimato, and it was called Mayday, and it was supposed to be about all the chemical attacks that Assad had perpetrated on his. So they besmirched me, and in this thing, I wouldn't talk to them, obviously, for obvious reasons. But the BBC put it out. They didn't come and ask me about it. She did. Oh, my dear, would you give me an interview? You fuck off. Are you crazy? You think I'm going to talk to you so you can twist whatever I say and take quotes out of context? I mean, half her programs were just made up docudrama. She has a Mr. X, you know, who she claims was in the CIA. No name. No, who says the most ludicrous things, you know, that don't make any sense at all. But it's just propaganda. Well, that's the BBC. Well, the BBC is supported by license-paying members of the public. They have an absolute responsibility to be even-handed. They're not. they're under the thumb. They helped to get rid of Jeremy Corbyn when he was about to win the general election in 2019. So we live in very difficult times.
We are always coming to one point, especially referring to propaganda, and it's a political case also, the case of Julian Assange. And as an artist, you are sort of very well known, a voice of the voiceless. You can give those people a voice, and you have the chance to address politicians and give your voice a special dimension. What would you ask our politicians, for example, in Austria, to do in relation to the case of Julian Assange?
Well, it would be interesting to know. You could hang on. Let me turn this off. There we are.
I would have expected a better ringtone.
Yeah, I would start off like this. I would ask them these simple questions: whether they believe in democracy, liberty, human rights, the shopping list of things that we all believe in. And if they say yes, you have to say, well, then you should base what you do politically upon those beliefs, not on what somebody in Washington, D.C. tells you to do, and not on what whoever the bloke who owns the big pharmaceutical company down the road asks you to do while giving you donations to the party or whatever, either over or under the table, but based upon your belief in Paris 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So do you believe in, and the law, do you believe in the law? If you do, you have to take 5 minutes to read up on the Julian Assange case, for instance, and say, this is a travesty. This man is not guilty of any crime. You brought up in the extradition proceedings, the law, you said political. This is a political, it is. You cannot extradite anyone from the UK in a political case. It's there. It's Article 4A in the extradition agreement between the United States of America and the United Kingdom. Excluded anything with a political basis. Excluded. Can't be done. You can't even start doing. And they just went, no, we're not interested in what the law is or the agreement. We're doing it. We're hanging a magpie in the hedge. This has nothing to do with the law or liberty or democracy or any of the things that we pretend we believe in. It has to do with the exercise of power, and we are not giving any of it up. And we're going to kill this bloke because he is spreading the truth. So we're going to kill him because we cannot have the truth. We can't have the truth out there. So I would say to any politician, do you believe in the truth? Do you believe in the law? And do you love your brothers and sisters all over the world, irrespective of their ethnicity, religion, nationality, color, creed, whatever? Do you? Because I do. I do. That's why I do this. Mm-hmm. You know, if you do, my own mother used to say, or she said to me once when I was about 13, she said one day, Roger, you know, when you're older, she said, you will come up against knotty problems, difficult things, difficult decisions that you have to make. I'm going to give you some advice. When you do, I want you to read everything you can about the subject that is of concern to you. Really, really, really check it out in as much detail as you can. When you've done that, you've done all the heavy lifting. Oh, really, Mum? Well, how, you know? She's, yes, when you've done that, she said, it's easy. Then all you have to do is do the right thing. I was 13. Yeah, I feel quite emotional now that my mother, what an important thing to say to any child or teenager, you know, whatever. And I tried to do it. I would say that to any politician, including your Bundespräsident. Just I know he might have trouble with it, but just, you have to try and do the right thing. And if enough of us try and do the right thing, we the many will become we the overpoweringly many. When it suddenly dawns on us that we can overcome this bullshit and we can save the planet, because they are destroying it. The gangsters and oligarchs, the ruling class, the corporations, all of those people who together, collectively, are completely effing up our world that we human beings inhabit and that we need to share. Somebody, a character that I'd written into my new rock and roll show that I'm doing was a Lakota Woman. She's no longer in the show only because I decided it was too complicated to make all this film. But in the film, another character sings, if I ruled the world, every day would be the first day of spring. He's flirting with her, and she stops him in his tracks by looking at him. And he says, but you can't rule the world. The world cannot be ruled. The world must be loved, respected, honored, and shared. So, I mean, the Lakota Woman doesn't exist, but so that's me writing. That's the point. The United States of America wants to rule the world. That's why they've got 1,000 military bases everywhere. They want to rule the world, tell everyone what to do, and they do it. The sanctions on Venezuela is a perfect example of what they tried to do in 2019, February, with Guido, that prick. Oh, no, he's the president now. What are you talking about? No, he's not. He's just a bloke in the National Assembly. No, we've decided that he's the president. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Well, oh my God. Richard Branson says he should be. And he did. Richard Branson did a bloody concert, in Colombia on the border. Woo, whoopee for Guaido. Congress or the White House has decided there's a new president. We're getting rid of this bloke who believes in socialism, and who is part of the Bolivarian revolution and part of the whole movement that Chavez made so unbelievably successful in Venezuela and has dragged that country out of the penury that it was in when it was ruled by the settler colonialists from Spain and Portugal. And say, we don't want them. We don't want them. We want a puppet in there so we can get hold of the oil and the other minerals and things that they've got. You have to laugh, otherwise you just shoot yourself.
Yeah. Perhaps one final question. The clock is ticking. People are scared. Climate change is also becoming a really fraud that is getting nearer and nearer. And perhaps one final question: how much time do we have left to go on the streets and take the power back?
Well, my show that I'm just about to go on the road with in America, first gigs on July the 6th, is called "This Is Not a Drill," which is a phrase. It's an announcement that you associate with a warning of a nuclear attack. This is not a drill, blah, blah, blah. So that's what my show is called. And funnily enough, in one of my penultimate songs in the show, there's a ticking clock and it says, the atomic clock, the atom clock, stands at 90 seconds to midnight. And this is the closest that the human race has ever come to nuclear catastrophe. And if the nuclear clock ever strikes midnight, and it's gone down in the last few years from 4 minutes to 3 minutes, it's now at 90 seconds, or it was then. Probably now it's down to 60 seconds or even 50. If it ever strikes midnight, we're all dead. Every single thing on this planet is dead. And yet they're shouting at each other across the Ukrainian border and refusing to negotiate. That moron Biden won't even speak to the Russia. And he calls them names almost every day. He's calling Putin a war criminal and this and that. And so it's almost like they have a death wish. Unfortunately, in the United States, I was talking to somebody the other day it was Chris Hedges. I read an article, Chris Hedges, who estimates that about 30% of the population of the United States are Christian fascist evangelicals who actually, part of their belief is they're desperate for Armageddon to come. They sort of hope it'll be a war between Iran and Israel that sets it off, because that would be closer to the Bible story, which says that in the final conflagration, Jesus will appear, and that 30% of the population and any of their fellow believers will go to heaven holding hands with Jesus, and the rest of us will burn in hell forever. There will be 6 months, and then the world will be completely destroyed. This is 6 months after they've gone to heaven. There are websites in America that tell people how their pets can be looked after in that 6 months when they've gone to heaven with Jesus. I mean, you can't make this, but they're in power. Mike Pence was the vice president. He's one. Pompeo, Secretary of State, he's another. They believe this bullshit. So I can't remember what the question. Oh, I know. Yeah. So that and that's it. And then I play my song "Two Suns in the Sunset," which is about one man's experience of nuclear war. That he suddenly realizes that it's all over because he sees one sun behind him and there's one in front of him. And so that's what my show is about. It's about saying, listen, you've got to wrest power from the powerful. We have to get rid of these governments. We have to. We've got to stand together if we believe in all the things that they say they believe in, human rights, liberty, democracy. We have to stand together and say, all right, we're going to have those. Boom, you're out of here. We're going to do it by acting collectively. First things first, just do a deal with Russia, even if it's still Putin. It's really simple. Just the Ukraine says, no, we won't join NATO, and we will allow the people who we were shelling and bombing for 8 years the right to exist, and they can be semi-autonomous within a sovereign Ukraine. Whew, good, we can all go home and we'd stop worrying about there being a nuclear war over this thing. You know, it's simple, right? Why aren't they doing it? Because Biden wants to look strong and they think that they can crush Russia. Have they never read a history of the Second World War? Do you know what the Russians did to the Third Reich? The Russians did it at a huge cost. 23 million of them died defeating Hitler. You're going to walk over them and tell them what to do? How stupid. And why would you want to? They're Russians. They're Russians. Would you like it if they were telling you what to do? I mean, it's crazy. It's completely insane. So, I don't know. It's a long, hard road. But, you know, I do know that. I know on my show, Tina, this show, this is the message that I'll be putting across. And I won't be scared of telling American audiences that all their last 6 presidents have all been war criminals. Because you have to. You have to call a spade a spade. You have to tell the truth and really tell it. You can't skirt around it. It does no good, Bono, to go and have tea with George W. Bush and say what a charming, entertaining man he was. What are you talking about? He's the worst war criminal in our lifetimes, him and Tony Blair. The Iraq War was the big one, you know. So unless it turns out that the Ukraine is, that the United States is doing nothing to join the voices of reason and diplomacy to stop it. They're chuckling. They're sitting in the White House going, this is good. Let's keep it going as long as possible. but they're killing Ukrainians. Fuck the Ukrainians. They don't care. Let them all die. We don't care about them. Obviously, if they did care about Ukrainians, they'd stop it. They don't give a shit about Ukrainians. They love waving blue and yellow flags and pretending they care. But if they really cared, they'd have stopped this before it started. It's pitiful. It's just so pitiful. And don't get me started.
I hope we get you started. Perhaps one final message. We have the chance to address, for example, as you did before, our Bundespräsident or our Chancellor. What do you tell him and them to help to free Julian Assange?
Okay. Mr. Bundespräsident, respectfully, I don't know how much you know about Julian Assange, but I would really ask you to look into it and to support the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people around the world who are campaigning to have him freed. He has committed no crime. He is a very, very valuable member of society. So please help us, sir.
What emotional message. We are at the end of our program. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the time and those very interesting topics you told. Let me thank you very much. Give me the chance to send some greetings down to New York City, and thank you very much.
Okay, man. Well, thank you for having me, because this is the way that this is the only way. You will never see me. You will never see a word of mine printed in a mainstream media paper. You'll never see me on mainstream media TV. So these occasions are extremely important. So thank you very much as well.
Damit sind wir wieder am Ende von Vorarlberg Live angelangt. Ich darf mich herzlich bei Ihnen für das Interesse bedanken. Man darf gespannt sein, ob sich unser Bundespräsident zum flammenden Appell von Roger Waters äußern wird. Nichtsdestotrotz wünsche ich einen schönen Dienstagabend.